After January 6th, it can no longer be called veiled threats of political violence. When you hear a Republican politician get up there, like Tommy Tuberville, the representative senator for Alabama, although his primary residence is in Florida, explain that one to me, when he says, if we don't pass this bill that makes voting more difficult or threatens to remove citizens from the voting rolls, if we don't do that, you are going to have hell to pay in this country. It's coming, he says. That's not a veiled threat of political violence. There are no more veiled threats. If you have existed in the Donald Trump world of American politics, you don't get a mulligan anymore with your dangerous rhetoric. I'm going to play this clip of Tommy Tuberville, this disgraceful coward, this vile usurper of military readiness, an absolute FAKETRIOT if there ever was one. I'm the most military person there ever was, says a guy who rides his daddy's coattails of patriotism, doing nothing but damaging our position on a global stage. Here is Tommy Tuberville making non-veiled threats of political violence over the SAVE Act, which I'll get into after the clip.
If we do not show the American people that the elections are going to be fair and they're going to be satisfied with the outcome, no matter whether Republicans win or Democrats win, you are going to have hell to pay in this country. It's coming. And I'm not so sure that's not what the Democrats want. It's an embarrassing situation. For me, as a taxpaying American citizen, for the last 35, 40 years, it's embarrassing to know that we have less control over our election system than we have on anything else.
This is conspiracy created out of whole cloth by Donald Trump, the dear leader who can say nothing wrong. They're eating the pets. They're eating the pets. This is the guy they are just absolutely denigrating their own reputations for. A guy who's just lying. There was no fraud in the 2020 election. There was no fraud in the 2016 election. Certainly no voter fraud that could rise to the level of swaying the election this way or that. And right now in the House of Representatives, the thing that is sparking this threat of political violence is called the SAVE Act, where they want to make it illegal for non-citizens to vote, a thing that's already illegal in the United States. It's already something that when it's caught is prosecuted. I'm going to read a little bit from this explainer article from Vox, exactly what is at play here with this bill that now Tommy Tuberville is refusing to allow general officers to be promoted in our military, once again damaging the standing and the reputation of both our military readiness, but also just generally how we're thought of and viewed on a world stage because of idiots like Tommy Tuberville. Here's the headline from Vox. Republicans threaten a government shutdown unless Congress makes it harder to vote. The exhausting dance that precedes every single government funding battle has begun. And it goes beyond funding the government. It's now spilled over into making threats against the country that you're going to have hell to pay. It's coming, he says. It's that time again. The last act of Congress funding the federal government expires on September 30th. So, unless Congress passes new funding legislation by then, much of the government will be shut down. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, egged on by the House Freedom Caucus and former President Donald Trump, reportedly wants to use this deadline to force through legislation that would make it harder to register to vote in all 50 states. Johnson plans to pair a bill funding the government for 6 months with a Republican bill called the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or SAVE Act, that would require new voters to submit documentary proof of U.S. citizenship, such as a passport or birth certificate, in order to register to vote. There is no evidence that non-citizens vote in U.S. federal elections in any meaningful numbers. I'll say it again. There is no evidence that non-citizens vote in U.S. federal elections in any meaningful numbers, and states typically have safeguards in place to prevent them from doing so. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a Republican, for example, claims to have identified 1,634 potential non-citizens who attempted to register during a 15-year period. But these possible non-citizens were caught by election officials and were never registered. In 2020, nearly 5 million Georgians voted in the presidential election. More broadly, according to the Bipartisan Policy Center, illegal registration and voting attempts by non-citizens are routinely investigated and prosecuted by the appropriate state authorities, and there is no evidence that attempts at voting by non-citizens have been significant enough to impact any election's outcome. While non-citizen voting, which is of course illegal, has never been proven to have affected an election, there is evidence that the SAVE Act could have an impact on elections. That much is clear from Arizona, which already has a SAVE Act-like regime. Data from Arizona suggests that the state's law has made it slightly harder for people of color, a group that skews Democrat, to vote. And at least one analysis of Arizona voter data suggests that the SAVE Act could suppress voter registration among another group that tends to vote for Democrats, college students. So the bill could make it slightly more difficult for Democrats to win elections. And that, of course, is the point here. They want to make it harder to take advantage of your right to vote. Last paragraph. That said, the SAVE Act law does have a vague provision allowing voters who cannot provide the required documentation to submit other evidence that they are a citizen, and it provides that state or local officials shall make a determination as to whether the applicant has sufficiently established United States citizenship. What if you were born here and you didn't need to establish your citizenship? What if you don't have a copy of your birth certificate, which I didn't have for years and years? What if you have a fractured relationship with your family, let's say, and you don't have access to get the documentation that you need? You still have a right to vote. You're still a citizen. You're still not even naturalized. You were born here, although there is no difference between those two on the framework of who's a citizen and who's not. This is not about making our elections more secure. This is one, about fostering an uncertain environment relative to safety, relative to fomenting violence against the country. And this is also about winnowing the voter rolls, making it more difficult for Democrats specifically to win. The same thing with voter ID. Look, I get a lot of pushback on the voter ID thing, even from, shockingly, Democrats, people who label themselves progressive or liberal or just, run-of-the-mill corporate-type Democrats. But because on its face, it seems, yeah, that seems reasonable, show an ID. But when their motivation has been laid bare time after time after time, where Republicans say, well, yeah, we want to do this because it's going to make it easier for Republicans to win if we put voter ID in place, that's a problem. If the motivation, if the end result is Democrats don't get to vote, that's the problem. And that's the same exact thing with what this is to do. They're going to threaten a government shutdown. They're going to threaten violence under the banner of FAKETRIOTism, under the banner of being loyal to the dear cult leader who created the conspiracy out of whole cloth by himself. Gross. Anyway, what do you think? I would invite you to this conversation. You can comment below. We can have a conversation there. You can also call, leave me a voicemail, 714-576-4054, or you can email me, daily@dollemore.com. There are several ways to support this program if you're inclined to do so. Click the join button, become a channel member, go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/idatapodcast. You can stroll over to the new and improved merch store, dollemore.info, and pick up a Dollemore Daily shirt or mug or Fight Poverty, Not the Poor. We got a bunch of stuff. We're also adding new designs that are great. That would be another way. Anyway, follow me on social media. I am at Dollemore everywhere. I'd love to see you there. And I will see you next time. Be genuine. Take care of one another.